Hello. For this tutorial, we're going to focus on taking a an image, just a flat image. In this case, this is I think it's a llama in the foreground in front of Machu Picchu. It's my guess. And we're going to take this photo and we're going to extract the different layers of the photo to then import this file, this multi-layered file from Photoshop into After Effects for um, sort of a 3D flyby. So it will appear like the llama is closer and the mountains are further away as we kind of zoom in and this kind of thing. Let's go ahead and extract the elements. And so that's all we're going to be doing is just extracting the elements. That's all this tutorial is prepping the file for After Effects. And so the first thing is to just analyze the image itself and to figure out which elements are in the foreground, background, far background, how many layers, right? So do we want like a sky layer, a distant mountain layer, maybe a middle ground mountain layer, and then these dwellings or buildings and sort of like the mid ground. And then finally, we have the llama and the hill the llama is standing on in the foreground. So for this, I'm going to use my object selection tool, which is the fourth tool down on the Photoshop toolbar. And you'll notice that once I have that tool selected, as I hover over various parts of the image, it kind of recognizes distinct elements, right? Um, so uh, I don't want to go with the default. I'm actually going to tweak the options a little bit. So first of all, yeah, I am looking at the options toolbar, and you can see here's our familiar new selection, add to selection, subtract from selection, and so on that we get with many of the selection tools. Um, but I want to go ahead and uncheck the object finder. And what the object finder is, you can kind of see it working here is this thing that highlights as it goes over maybe these recognizable elements. And I actually want to unclick that. The other thing that I want to do is I want to change the mode from rectangle to lasso, right? And the reason why I want to do that is I want a little bit more control over what these elements are. A lot of times Photoshop can spot these pretty well, but sometimes um, it needs a little bit more help. And I found that if I use this method where I use the lasso mode of the object selection tool, I can get a little bit more accurate than the default of Photoshop. Especially with an image like this, where you'll see with the clouds, the clouds kind of spill over into the mountains, and so they're we can see these sort of clear delineations between the mountains and the sky, but the brightness values and even to some extent the color values are almost kind of blending together. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the foreground layer. And what I'm going to do, again, I'm in my lasso mode, and I'm going to just kind of roughly draw um, with my lasso around the area that I want to appear in my foreground, which is both the llama and the hill that the llama is standing on. Right, now I don't have to be perfect. I'm going to do kind of an estimate here. All right, it's going to take a while to think. Okay, so you'll notice that it did grab the hill pretty well, but it didn't grab the llama. It's recognizing there's some difference there. So I'm going to try this again, and I'm going to use the add to selection tool. And if it doesn't work this time, I have another plan. But let's see if I just add the llama to that. And again, you can see I'm not being perfect about this at all. I'm just kind of giving it, yeah. So we're getting there slowly. So it might take a few of these add to selection tool tools, but this is still going to happen a lot faster than if I tried to do this manually with the lasso tool. All right, finally, we got it. Okay, so you can see the marching ants around the llama and the hill kind of separated from the other elements. There's actually a little bit of marching ants around the legs, so I'm going to do one more pass and hopefully that gets everything. I'm just kind of trying to circle all of that. And I'll do it one more time. So that's a tricky thing is sometimes with any of these selection tools, you think you have everything, but there might be a little bit left over. So you might need to look really quickly. Okay, so I'm going to go Command J to paste a copy on top of my background layer, my complete image. And if I toggle that visibility of the background off and on, you can see that there is my foreground layer. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to name that foreground. All right. Now I'm going to click back on the background because this is what I want to select from. Again, when you're using these selection tools, it's important that you click on the layer that you want to select from. It's easy to forget. So for example, I had been working in this llama foreground layer and that was selected. And so it's easy to forget I'm on that layer. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to select these like dwellings, buildings in the midground here. And really, if I don't change this from foreground to the complete image, which is background, it's going to select from the llama foreground layer. And it's not going to get very much because there's not really a lot of image data on that level. So I'm going to select my what's called my background layer, which is my complete image. And again, still object selection tool, add selection, and lasso mode. And I'm just going to draw a rough lasso around the dwellings here. And let's see if it gets it completely. Okay, that's pretty good, right? I'm gonna do it again. You can see it's missing this part right here. I'm gonna just circle that. And that time it kind of went the opposite way for me. So it is a little trial and error, but I do find that it's still a lot quicker than trying to sort of manually go around. Okay, we're getting closer. You can see the marching ants are. And if it does keep causing problems, like you can see there's this little like section in the middle, I can just switch to my regular lasso tool and it's still on add to selection. And I can just say, you know what, I'm just going to circle that. It's just going to make it easier to circle that bit. And I'm just sort of scanning the image up here. There's a little bit of like dwelling, like rooftop area at the top. I'm gonna go ahead and try to grab that. It's not perfect, but I'm trying to keep this tutorial on the shorter end, so I won't get as methodical and precise as I could. Okay, so and then there's a little section, as I said, you kind of gotta keep a close eye on this. There's a tiny little section at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and circle that. Okay, so there we go. And then again, Command J, and I'll toggle off the visibility for the foreground and the background so you can see just the dwellings here. And I'll call that midground. I guess I could call it dwellings just so we have a better sense. Okay, so what we have to do, I'm going to fill in some extra dwelling building area down here. Um, because when we're zooming in or moving around this in 3D space in After Effects, we might peek we might get to the bottom of this layer, in which case we would just see this like divide where there'd just be this blank space. So I need to add a little bit of extra building and that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is use some AI to do that. Um, and again, I'm on the dwellings layer, and I'm just going to sort of like estimate where would these dwellings be if the hill continued to go down. It doesn't have to go very far, but I am going to kind of overlap my selection so that it goes a little bit into the image portion. All right, so something like that. So we have a little bit of the image portion selected at the bottom, and then sort of a wider selection down here in this blank space. And with the newest version of Photoshop, you get this generative fill bar that kind of pops up whenever there is a selection. I'm going to go ahead and move over to the paint bucket icon, the fill selection, and click on that. And I'm going to choose content aware fill. And then just click OK. And hopefully it creates some extra building stuff. And there you go. That's pretty good. Okay. You can see a little repetition in here with this little thing and then this, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. That's pretty good on the first round. So I'm going to deselect that. I'm going to toggle the visibility back on. And you can see that that area is overlapping. There we go. I had to turn my llama foreground back on. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing again with the mountains. Again, I'm on my background image layer, and I have to select from there. So this time I'll get these, I'll call these like mid-ground mountains. So I'm just going to select that one. Nope, I forgot to move back to my object selection tool. All right, so click on object selection, and I'll do a selection there, and we'll see what that does. Pretty good. I'll do another add to selection. And again, after a couple of these, it's going to hopefully keep refining it more and more. But at some point, it might just be easier to switch over to your regular matte lasso tool, or there's also a magnetic lasso tool that has, it's kind of like a smarter lasso tool in the sense that it can detect edges and differences in brightness and color values. So it knows where those edges are. I might end up using that in a bit for the second set. So we have one selection here, but these are also part of that mid-ground mountain as well. So I go back to my object selection tool, do kind of a lasso. And again, you can see this is not perfectly following the outline of the mountain, but it's giving Photoshop an idea of like what is the object that I'm going for. All right. And this time I'll switch to my regular lasso tool. All right. So those are both selected. And once again, I go Command J, and I'll go ahead and toggle the background layer off so that we can see that more clearly, and dwellings and foreground are also toggled off. So I'll do the same thing I did with the dwellings, which is, I will take my lasso tool, and there's little bits of mountain missing where there are grass. I'm just going to kind of estimate where that mountain ridge would fall. I'm sure somebody who is really familiar with Machu Picchu would say, hey, that's not exactly how that ridge goes. But for the casual observer, I'm going to fudge it a little bit. All right. And once again, I click on my paint bucket, content aware fill, and let's see how that goes. All right, deselect that, pretty good. All right, there's some slightly wonky stuff going on in here, but again, um, it would take a really close eye to see, um, what was going on there. All right, so I'm not going to keep doing this just for the sake of keeping this tutorial a little on the shorter end, but you can see where I'm going with this. I'll go ahead and call this mid-ground. And then just to follow what I would end up doing, I would go ahead and do the same with the mountains. And actually, what I might do, I lied. I might go ahead and start messing around with the mountains just to show you all another tool, which is the magnetic lasso tool that I was talking about. Right. So again, on my background layer where I select everything, and you'll get to see how the magnetic lasso tool works. And all I do is I do a single click and it automatically starts laying down this pathway. So I'm not clicking and dragging like I am with the lasso tool. I'm just clicking once and then dragging with my mouse or finger on my trackpad or whatever method you are using to select. But I'm not putting a lot of effort into getting this selection to going around these mountains. I'm going to just kind of cut across here for a second. All right. So the magnetic lasso is doing all this sort of like smart detection of edges for me. And I'll kind of cut across here again. All right. So mainly I just wanted to show with that how this magnetic lasso tool works. But as you can see, even though there is sort of this like smart detection, you can see that it does take a little bit of time. It's not quite as difficult as it would be if I were trying to freehand this with the lasso, but it's still a little bit more labor intensive than, right? So there's my selection there. And I would do the same thing once again that I did with the midground, the dwellings, and the foreground, right? In terms of the selecting the area that I want to do content aware fill, which would include, by the way, this, I would need to have this in my selection, this for midground mountain to content aware fill as well, because I don't want that being part of this layer. All right, so you get where we're going with that. And then finally, the final layer would be the clouds layer.